Good. I'll put this on the floor. That'll do. What a story. The Abraham and Isaac. I went to my pharmacist in the week, and he's a very, very keen tennis player. I knew this, and I said, did you watch and follow the fortunes of Emma Raducanu? And he said, oh, yeah, he did. He said, actually, as a matter of fact, she came to our club a couple of years ago to play a tournament. And he said, none of us thought she was very good. It's amazing, isn't it, how things change, you know. And you think of Abraham, and he was a guy who he left what would be considered as civilization and went to a nowhere place and wandered as a nomad with his herds and his cattle. And he was following some bizarre calling of God and dream that he would be blessed, but they already knew that his wife was barren. We told that right at the very beginning of the story, that she couldn't have children, and but that somehow he would have all these descendants and he'd have a land, but he was going away from where his family was, and he was going to a foreign place. How would he get land? How would he get descendants? How would he amount to anything? And boys, has Abraham amounted to something? He's one of the figures of world history, isn't he? Father of the Jewish nation, and by faith, therefore, the father of the Christian people, you and I. Father to the Muslim people and the Arab people. Just a huge character on the world stage. And of the stories of Abraham, this story is one that stands out. This is just right up there. I brought this commentary because I just thought the first paragraph was worth reading of his comment. He says, no other story in Genesis, indeed in the whole Old Testament, can match the sacrifice of Isaac for its haunting beauty or its theological depth. So much is packed into so few words that our lengthy comments have not done it justice. Here we cannot explore again all the intricacies of the narrative. Rather, I shall simply keep to the main track and indicate how it has continued to inspire reflection by Christians and Jews down to the present day. When Tim gave me this title, I said thanks. That's quite a story, that one, and we're going to get into it. And I would like to suggest that the reason why it's become such a massive story for theologians. And for people to reflect on in various ways, philosophers as well, is because it has, well, I've called it its unique selling point. This story has its unique selling point. It's intended to unsettle our emotions. That's the you. If it doesn't unsettle us, we haven't really just absorbed what it's saying. It should unsettle us. It throws a spotlight on faith. It just raises all the questions about what the limits and boundaries and meaning and content of faith is. And then it points forward, obviously, to Jesus. And it's got those elements in it, and they're richly intertwined in this story. It begins with the comment, after these things. After what things? Well, chapter 21 is a momentous chapter in Genesis. If you flip through chapter 21, you'll see that Isaac is born, this promised heir to Sarah. You'll see that in that chapter, Ishmael is driven out along with Hagar. Dreadful heart wrench for Abraham. He loved Ishmael. But that's what needed to happen. And God said he would provide for him. In that chapter, you'll find that Isaac And Abraham, it says, they prospered. And they prospered so much that the people amongst whom they were living, they came and they made a treaty with them. They wanted to say, well, you've become a powerful person amongst us now. We want to know that you'll be kind to us like we've been kind to you. We want to make sure that you're not going to turn around and start beating us up. And he actually got rights to water in perpetuity. Do you realize that that's about the first thing he's got in his entire career there in Canaan? He's actually got the rights. It's acknowledged that, yes, Abraham, you dug that well and you can have that water. Apart from that, Abraham had nothing in terms of property. When Sarah dies, he gets a burial field. So that's all he's got by the time he dies. The right to a well and a burial field. That's all he's got. And one son. That's all he's got. And then we come to this chapter. After these things, Abraham was in a place of comfort. Abraham was in a place where things were easier than they'd ever been through his life. And then comes this test. It's called a test. What a test. What a test. God says, I want you to sacrifice your son. You know, quite a lot of years ago, we used to work up in and live up in Newcastle, and I had a very good friend from my school days in London who was living in Scotland, and we were due to travel south to start training for ministry at Regent's. So it was about 30 years ago, I guess, would that be? 30, a bit more than that, maybe about 30 years. And we went up from Newcastle to just above Glasgow for a lovely sunny day in their back garden in the summer. And there was my nearly 3-year-old and my, I think about 6-month-old with us. And there was my friend with his little girl who was just a bit older than Dan. So she was probably already 3, and another child there. And we had this wonderful afternoon just in the garden and having picnic and playing with the children. And at one point with his little daughter, Rachel, just fell in the stream, and I had to leap up and lift her out of the water, but the tears went quite soon. It was a lovely, lovely day. And we went home, and then obviously we moved down to Oxford. Well, wind on about 6 months, and we were in our flat in Regent's Park College in the Angus house, and the phone goes, and it's my friend Adrian, and he said, "Just think you need to know, James, that Rachel got meningitis and died." 24 hours, within 24 hours from diagnosis, taken to hospital, dead, gone. And he had the whole thing of it was snowy, and her footprints were all over the garden in the snow, and he had to watch that snow melt and all the footprints just melt away. Well, Marion and I, we went straight into our sleeping children, and we just looked at them, and we held each other. And I can remember coming out of that room, and we were hurting. You know, it hurts because you've played with this little girl and she's gone, and these are good dear friends, very dear friends of ours, and they're hurting. But obviously there's something else going on, isn't there? You're feeling the vulnerability. You're feeling their 3-year-old gone like that. Life is so fragile sometimes. And there's my little 3-year-old, and there's my little, now a year-old child. So precious. And that thought of, they could just go like that. And I remember holding my wife and saying, listen, we just have to hold our children with open hands. They're God's gift to us. They're not ours. They're people in their own right. They have their own lives. And we're entrusted with them to nurture them and care for them, and to steward that precious gift and bring them up as well as we can. But ultimately, we're not responsible. We can't. We have to let God give, and we have to let God take away. You know, we're going to sing "Blessed Be Your Name" at the end of this sermon. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. So when I read this story here, I have just a point of very, very early contact with the emotion of it. And there's God saying to Abraham, take your son, your only son, the son you love, Isaac, and sacrifice him. And if you're anything like me and many other people, our hearts cry out, Lord, what is this? What on earth is this? That God would ask a man to sacrifice a child. My heart rebels against that thought. If you turn back to chapter 18, verse 23 to 25, you're in the story of Abraham arguing. All right, yeah. You're in the story of Abraham arguing with God about destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says, God, you're going to, if there are just 50 righteous people, will you destroy it? God, you're not going to destroy the innocent with the guilty. And he says, can the judge of all the earth do this? Let's get those wording right. Important words. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous, will the wicked? And then verse 25, far be it from you to do such a thing. Abraham knew God. He said, far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you, will not the judge of all the earth do right? And I say the thing, how can God ask Abraham to give his son? How can he do it? How can Abraham not argue with God in this instance? My heart wants to rebel. Then how can God ask Abraham to go to Moriah, 3 days walk away? Can you imagine those 3 days walking? Can you imagine it? Can you imagine the conversation, if anything? Can you imagine walking along that road with your son there and these servants, and maybe they're having some jokes and some banter together, and you're Abraham, and every step of that way your heart's going, what's this about? What's God asking me to do? How am I going to do this? Torture every step of the way. And he has to then take the wood and load it onto the son's back, who walks up the hill, and then asks Abraham the question, Abraham, Father, you've got the fire, I've got the wood. Where's the animal? Can you imagine that heart? The heart of Abraham as that question is asked. And he said, God will provide. And then that God would let Abraham go right to the point of tying up the boy and putting him on a pile of wood on an altar and lifting a knife. It's a shocking story. This is a shocking story. I spoke to a social worker 2 days ago. I said, listen, if you're a social worker and you heard this story, what would you do? That boy is not going back into that household. He's out of there. That father's got criminal. The police are involved, and that guy's probably in court. He doesn't actually kill him, but he binds him. It's abuse. Can you imagine the relationship between Isaac and Abraham after that? What's going to happen in terms of their eyes meeting in the future? What about Abraham going back and saying to his wife, Sarah, I've just killed our son? It's just a shocking story. I wish I had simple answers for you. And I wish I could just say, actually, because of this, this, and this, actually it's all okay. But I can't. I haven't got those answers. But what I do have, and what I believe to be true, is that it's supposed to unsettle us. That's what the story is about, and this is why it's been so important down the age. It's supposed to shake us to our very cores. It's supposed to say, James, that is faith. What have you got? That is faith. James, what have you got? How much do you trust God? Do you believe that God can fulfill his promises to you and to your family, even if you do this next thing which I'm asking you to do? Do you believe it? Will you take that step? And that's why it throws us and throws a spotlight onto faith, doesn't it? Are you with me still? Heavy, isn't it? Let me say a couple of things about faith. Faith isn't a feeling. Faith, I've put on here, faith is a trust that chooses to act. Abraham had no warm fuzzies. Isn't it nice knowing God sort of fuzzies as he took that walk with Isaac? But he chose to act because he trusted God. He chose to act. I should make a little aside before I do this, actually. Otherwise, this would be wrong not to make this aside. I'm sorry. I should have done it before I started the point on faith. Please, this could not happen today. Just know this, don't you? You know this. This couldn't happen today. We have more light. God's given us scriptures. We've got it spelt out for us what's right and wrong. God cannot ask you or I to do something crazy like this today because we know it goes in the face of what he's told us in his word, and he's put us into family of believers where we can talk to each other and say, is this crazy or is this right? This story shouldn't be used by people who are unbalanced to make crazy supposedly spiritual actions, okay? So please, this is not a license for people to do crazy spiritual things. This is. We have God's word and we have each other to talk to. Okay, so let me just say that before we go on. Back to faith. I've brought this little old commentary with me, which my mother gave me many years ago, on James, the book of James, and it's called "Belief That Behaves." Belief that behaves. That is faith. Belief that behaves. That is faith. Faith acts. And we need to go into James. We need to go to James chapter 2, because this spells out many things about faith that are relevant to our story today. So James chapter 2. Verse 21 ties it straight together with the story we've been looking at. Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? This really annoyed Luther, Martin Luther, famous for the Reformation, because he was so big on we're justified by faith alone. And here was James saying, but actually Abraham was approved by God because he did this. It was an action. He obeyed. And it caused Luther a problem. I want to tell you there's no problem. That actually James isn't actually saying that faith isn't the way things start. Let me read a little bit more of this passage. So we're going to read James chapter 2, verse 14 and following. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothing and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by actions, is dead. But someone will say to you, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without your deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. What James is saying there is that faith has to act. It's belief that behaves. If there are no actions, you've got to say that faith is dead because it's doing nothing. It's not that faith isn't where things start from with God. What it's saying is if you have got faith, then you will do the works of God. And you can see it by that way. How many have done lateral flow tests? Yeah, we've all done lateral flow tests. Doing the lateral flow test, did that give you COVID? No, it shows that you've got COVID. If you do a pregnancy test, so I'm told, it tells you that you are pregnant. It doesn't make you pregnant, unless it's a very different test to what I think it is. But we're used to the idea of tests that show that something is present. That we obey God and do his will and live his ways shows that we have a relationship with him, which is built on faith. And faith comes first. And if there are no actions, then there's no faith. If your lateral flow test is negative, you haven't got COVID, unless your lateral flow test has gone wrong. But the point is, it just shows what you are. And this is what James is saying. Our actions show that we are walking in faith with God and have that relationship with him. Abraham couldn't have done this at the beginning of his his walk with God. He couldn't have done this. Have you heard the expression, faith is like a muscle, it grows with use? That as we take a step in faith following God, one small step, that gives us confidence to take the next rather bigger step following God. And it gets bigger as we go on. This calling to Abraham has come years down the line. You've got to remember that Abraham has seen God provide for him all these years. You've seen God give him a son, Isaac, when both he and his wife are very old. He's learnt that God comes through on his promises. And the last thing I want to say about faith is that, so I've said that faith is belief that behaves, it's action. You choose to exercise faith. You don't just feel faith, you say, okay, I believe God, so I will act. That's faith. We've seen that faith is something that grows, but the last thing I want to say about faith is faith has its rewards. And Abraham, God says, I swear by myself. There's nothing greater than God, and God swears by himself. Abraham, I am going to make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Abraham, you are going to possess this land and its cities and reside here. Your descendants will. Abraham, you will be a blessing for all mankind. And when we act in faith, we always bless others as well. Our deeds of faith bless the world because we're doing God's will. Faith is very, very powerful in these ways. It's just a little bit on faith then. Now let me just bring us towards the end by the last point. So the first point was that it unsettles us. This unsettles our emotion, this story. The second one is it's a spotlight on faith, and it just brings those issues of faith right to the surface for us. And it makes me ask questions about my own faith. But it also points to Jesus. And there's so many connections with Jesus, aren't there, in this story? The location, Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This is where the temple was built. This is where the sacrifices of the Old Testament went on. This is the area where Jesus died for us. And that's the link there with Jesus. Your son, your only son, the son you love. The Jesus, one of the titles being the Son of God. Not in the genetic sense, but the Son of God because he's begotten. He arises out of God's very being. He's integral to the person of God. And Jesus and God gives that dimension of himself for us. The Son he loves, God gives his Son for us. We get a glimpse of the heart of God as he sees Jesus dying on the cross for your sin and my sin. The pain of the alienation between the Father and the Son in the Godhead, as Jesus takes your sin and my sin, that unimaginable grief of watching that happen. You see the Son carrying the wood for the sacrifice up the hill, and Jesus carried his cross. You see the obedience of Jesus, the obedience of the Son, and you know, many commentators will say that you've got a guy well over 100 here with a fit young man, a son. How does he bind him? How does he put him on an altar? This young man he's submitting to the will of his father in this. Isaac submitted. Jesus submitted to the will of the Father to save us, and above all, as we've touched on, the willingness of the Father, the willingness of the Father to give the Son for us. This is Jesus. Okay, let me just tie this all together. I'm going to wind the clock on further again with family, and just not that many years ago, my daughter and her husband wanted to go on a year adventure. Jonathan, my son-in-law, had set himself just that little vision, that dream we were talking about, a dream that when he qualified in his area of work, he would take a year off and travel before they settled down. And so they've started looking at various charities to see who they might travel with, and they went to mission organizations. And BMS said to Naomi and Jonathan, how about going to Afghanistan? So they come to us and say, how about going to Afghanistan? And Marion and I, we talked about this. And our answer had to be, Naomi, Jonathan, if you believe that this is a calling of God, we have to say yes. If it's just part of a jolly for a year away, then don't go, please, because if anything happens to you, it'll break our hearts. They didn't go. Jonathan's father said to Jonathan, he said, if you go, you'll improve my prayer life. I think I can sign up for that one. Countless Christian parents down the ages have had to send their children away with their blessing to obey God's will in their lives. And we thought we were going to be asked to do something which we didn't want to have to do. But we'd said those years ago, we have to hold our children with open hands, because it's God and his calling which is supreme. Wonder how you're feeling at the end of this sermon. I wonder how you're viewing your faith. I know how I'm viewing my faith, that I need to keep it very simple. I need to very simply be able to say to God, God, when you call, I'll trust you. When you call, I'll do. In the James passage, the issue was, will you help the poor brother and sister? Will you give them food? Will you give them clothing? That remains the question. It's so embarrassing when these things happen, isn't it? Will you remain faithful to Christ's calling in terms of giving of your material wealth to bless the poor? That's what James was saying about faith. The faith of Abraham and the faith of Jesus going to the cross, the trust in God, these things challenge me. Does God have the call on your career? Does God have the call on your marriage partner? your choice of marriage partner. Many of us are looking around here probably are past that stage. I certainly am a long way past the point of having to choose a marriage partner. But maybe somebody watching, it's God's business what career you choose and what marriage partner you have. How do we use our wealth? What we do with our leisure? Are we content? Am I content to watch crime movies that I will have forgotten in 3 weeks' time when I could have done something really worthwhile with that time? Will I come out to the prayer time together? Will I go and find time to share my faith with a friend? How do I use my time? You know that you see those pictures of those guys with black hats and black coats bombing around Jerusalem at very, very high speed, these Orthodox Jews. You know the ones? You've seen the films, the pictures of it? Do you know why they bomb around at high speed? Because they believe that the greatest treasure God's given to us is our time, and to waste it, therefore, is the greatest sin. And so they bomb around in the heat, in their black stuff, because they mustn't waste time. They maybe have to waste a lot of time getting themselves washed afterwards, I guess. But the point is there. You know, how do we use our time? Is that an offering of faith? Loving the unlovely, loving our enemies. Do we trust God that if I love my enemies, that God will sort out what I need in terms of my protection and my provision? Will I love my enemies, or am I wanting my justice? Forgiving those who grieve us. Sharing our faith when we'd rather keep quiet. I have to ask myself these questions when I finish a story like this. What's my faith on the scale of Abraham? What's my scale? You know, when we follow God, when we give to him our trust, when we say, God, I will trust you whatever you call me to do, and we're available to him, he can do wonderful things through us as individuals and as a church. Unbelievable things. Just think of those 12 disciples who were left behind, and some of the others who were with them as part of that group, and how they changed the whole course of human history. What could God do with us if we were wholly given to God and responding to God? And what's the blessing he would bring both for our lives and for our families' lives and for our neighbors' lives and for our community's life and for our nation's life in this world? It just starts with those individual choices of Abraham, who was just in that day and age a nobody, who left security, who followed God on this trip down to the promised land, following a promise because he believed God. So that's the end of the sermon. Will we believe God? Will we trust God this week? Will we trust God with the details of our lives? Big one though, isn't it? Big one. Big one. Blessed be your name.